Hey guys! So today we are going to talk about message-oriented architecture in front-end. So let's get into it. Now, this is a little bit special because I'm going to say something and you're going to think I'm silly because you most likely are. And you're going to think that I'm a hipster and that all of these things, most likely, or maybe you don't. I might be completely off the mark here, but message-oriented architecture, why in the world would I use a term such as that? Because for the seniors out there, you might actually know what I'm talking about, or the pub-sub pattern, whatever. And for the trendy front-end developers at the mid-level out there, you may be vaguely familiar with the term I'm using. And if I say Redux and Flux, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for the juniors, you're as lost as you can possibly be. Don't worry, I will see if I can enlighten you to the amazing thing that is message-driven. Well, message-driven development, if you will. So the idea basically is, if you know anything about Redux and Flux and this type of architecture, is that you have some type of message that goes through a pipe. If you mentally picture a pipe, and as it passes through the pipe, there's all these different checkpoints, or listeners, if you will, that are notified that said event is happening. Why is this powerful? Well, because when you have many different components that work in isolation, it gets very tricky because some of these components may need to know that one thing is happening somewhere else. And since a program is a linear execution type of thing, you have to have some type of bottleneck, some point where everything is connected so that you can make sure that whenever something happens, everybody knows about it, or all the components. Now, Redux and Flux and whichever, Flux being basically the architecture mentality, I don't really see much in terms of difference between that and what pub-sub or the intention behind pub-sub. But Redux may possibly be the best implementation of this sort of architecture that I've ever seen. At least on the front end. Server side, that's a different story. But in essence, that's what you want. And why am I so excited about this? Why is this such a big deal in front end? Well, let me tell you. For this to make any type of sense, I have to explain a thought that I've had. And it's actually a thought that I see, maybe it's just me, but I see a lot of, you know how when you're told your star sign or whatever, and you're told that you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger at some point, you know, the phenomenon that I'm describing is that if you look for something, then you will find it. It's the way that these predictions actually come true, why people believe them to be true. Because if something is vague enough, you start seeing we humans see semantic meaning in things, and we start creating our own patterns just because our brain is wired to seek that pattern. And this is very much the same thing. So a lot of the trends going around in front end these days is around having things such as component libraries. Designers have design libraries, all these types of this component mentality, right? And it was very much brought about and at least popularized by React, not necessarily just React. It's not the only framework out there, but there's a lot of hype right now about component-based programming or component-based UI layouts. And see, what I want to touch on here is that I think that what's going to happen is that only one thing from all of this is going to stick around. And that's the mess. And this is actually, it's so funny. It's so funny. I think that all of these different frameworks, they're going to go away, but we're going to keep around the message-driven architecture type of idea. It kind of feels like we almost, as a front-end community, we've always almost gone through this development process. It almost feels as growing up. It feels like we've had all this time now where we've been like turbulent and emotional and been trying out different identities, and we've been trying all these different things, and now things are finally starting to mature a little bit, and we're getting to a point where we're going to settle in a little bit more, get to be grown-ups. And I think that that which is going to indicate the start of all of this is when I start seeing companies realizing that frameworks such as, say, Polymer or just using vanilla JavaScript in the right way is the way to go. And what's going to happen most likely then is that which I think is interesting, is that we're going to go full circle and we're going to come back to the original issue that we had with this approach to just use vanilla JavaScript and so forth. Now, thanks to Webpack, a lot of the problems with global scoping is kind of gone, and we are getting modules we're getting native. Sooner or later, we're going to get native support for imports in JavaScript. However, up until that point, I think that what's going to happen now is that we are going to see a move back to this. The component mindset is what we always wanted, but I think the key thing to take away here is that the only thing that's most likely is going to remain after all of these frameworks are starting to get shuffled out of existence is Flux or Redux or whatever you want to call it, the pub subsystem. And let me tell you why. I think that this is going to happen because originally, the issue with having a layout that all these issues that we had with JavaScript back in the day was due to having, at least from my perspective, an issue with two things. The first thing was the global namespace. Like, it was very difficult to maintain some type of sane code base when everything was living in the global namespace and we didn't have all these practices, bundlers weren't existing. You couldn't split things up into modules in an effective manner. You could, but it wasn't all that intuitive to people. You know, back in the day, you would create these modules, these files, and concatenate them together and all this other stuff that you used to do. That brought along other types of issues, but I will argue that we've reached a point where this is not really an issue anymore. The second thing that was an issue, and it still is an issue for most things these days, is state management, because state is the root of all evil, and it still is. State management is absolutely horrible. But what I think is interesting is that I think that Flux is the best solution to state management on the client side I've ever seen. And what I think is beautiful about it is that it's completely technology independent, or rather at least framework independent. That's what's so beautiful about it. I've more than once I've made my own implementation of Redux, or the base. Redux is of course more performant than my implementation, but I didn't really care so much about performance. I just wanted to see if I could do it. And that's what's so beautiful about it. It's so simple, and it fills this extremely important thing I was saying earlier. Because the fundamental problem with the layout when we have this component-based mindset that everything is a component, the issue happens when these components have their own states and they need to respond to each other when something happens. For example, if you click a button and a side menu comes out from the side, and you need a third component to know about that the side menu is now being shown, you need some way, that a sustainable way to communicate that information to the third component. And Flux does this beautifully. And it has absolutely, I know that Redux is like this close to React, but I want you to take that out of your head, guys, and throw it away. Redux is not React specific, and you don't even have to use Redux. You can actually build your own thing. But what I want you to take away is that I think that the best future-proof mindset that you can have is that you start thinking about these two concepts, components, regardless of if it's in a React view, whatever, they don't own components. You can create your components in just HTML. You can just do it natively. You can use anything to create a component to isolate things. I have several videos that where I show you how you can do this. And the second thing is this message brokering between things. And that's where Flux or Redux or pub sub, if you will, come into play. If you keep these two thoughts with you, you will create sustainable, great user interfaces regardless of which framework you're using, if you're even using a framework, and regardless of what's coming up over the bend. Have a great day.